So, hello everyone. I am Dianna Gunn. I host the Weeknight Writers events. We do free virtual conferences 3 times a year. We have one coming up in March, and I really wanted to talk about how to make events accessible to um, writers who are neurodivergent and who have other disabilities as well. Um, because a lot of neurodivergent folks do have other overlapping disabilities, and that also impacts the way that we are able to access, or in many cases, not access spaces. So it looks like the technical difficulties are fixed. So hopefully, we will have our final panelists with us in a moment. But for now, I am just going to say hello, Jade. Hello, Kat. Please introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about why accessibility matters to you personally. Kat, do you want to start?
Sure. Hi, I'm Kat Gordon. I'm an autistic, disabled, and queer co-editor of two multi-genre disability fiction anthologies, Nothing Without Us and Nothing Without Us Too. I'm also an author myself. This September, the first book of my new series, Season 1, Iris and the Crew Tear Through Space, will be available. It has body mind celebration, no cure narratives, an accessible ship, and pew, pew, pew. I'm also the founder of the Spoonie Authors Network, which is an initiative to create community amongst authors who manage spoons. And that's about it for now. And I'm really glad to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. And Jade?
I am Jade. I'm an autistic and ADHD writer and editor. And for me personally, writing and editing has really been part of my journey to discover my neurodivergence because it took me a long time to figure out why I couldn't finish a book, but I could finish editing things. So, yeah, it's been a big part of my journey and how I process my own neurodivergence. And it's been really fun to meet other people in the same space.
Awesome.
I just realized I never said why accessibility means something to me. I forgot the second part of the essay question.
All right. Well, if you would like to answer that, you can. And hello, we have our final panelist. Amazing. We hear you.
Yep.
I can see you. Kat, did you? No worries. Technology is difficult. Kat, did you want to say something about why accessibility is important to you personally?
You want to know something? I think I'll be answering it as we go on. So I'm okay. I'd really like to hear Virginia introduce.
All right. Virginia, say hello and tell us a little bit about yourself.
also run QuaranCon, which is a virtual convention that we started up in March, April, something like that of 2020. And yeah, I don't know. do we need any further info? That's
No,
a bit about
that's
me.
good. That is.
Yeah. ADHD crew. I don't know. And and also anxiety and depression. I got the trifecta, so woohoo!
What fun.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I am totally speaking of ADHD. I'm now like I don't even know what's happening because I just got in here, and the time I was gonna spend focusing, I'm now like I was struggling to hit here. So my apologies to everyone for both running late and also now being a mess.
No worries. We are all messes here, right?
No apology necessary.
Yeah, that's the great thing about being in a neurodivergent space is that we all get it.
Fair enough.
Speaking of neurodivergent spaces and spaces generally, what is accessibility and why is it so important in the context of writing events?
Well, I'm glad you started with an easy question. I mean, yeah, I feel like accessibility is making an event open and welcoming to as many people as possible, available to as many people as possible. Um, and uh, yeah, I mean, it matters to me because I want our author community to be as representative of humanity as possible. And so, and it's, I think, especially for writing, um, it just feels like I want everyone to have a shot at telling their story. Um, and so the idea, because we all benefit from reading a like we reading they've done so many studies that show that reading develops empathy, right? And so the more varied the stories we read, the more empathy we gain and the better off society is, right? So so then when it comes to something like a writing conference or just a, in the case of CorinCon an SFF conference, but very writing heavy, and the idea of sharing those particular types of stories and how we do it, and getting developing those relationships with other authors and all those things, to not make it as available, as accessible as possible to as many people as possible, um irks me. But of course, like there are a lot of challenges to that, right? Like it's not an easy thing to do. It's a wonderful concept, and it is possible to do. It's not as hard as some people think it is, but it's also, there are challenges to it for sure. And we've learned so much with missteps and just, and failures along the way.
Yeah, we're
Um
gonna get into
yeah.
that more in later questions,
Definitely.
but I'm gonna pass on the original question to Kat, which was what is accessibility and why is it important in the context of writing events?
So for me, accessibility is literally giving access. And so that folks can participate in events, just in the same way that anyone can. Like there's like an equal enjoyment of participation, or equal ability to participate in things. I feel it's extremely important because denying people access means that you actually are excluding them. And you know, I am someone who uses a mobility device. So yes, accessibility for sure is about, ramps and doors that open and all that kind of thing, which usually is the first thing that comes to mind. But as an autistic person, um, being able to give me, for example, a quiet space where I can just retreat for a little while, because there's a lot of sensory stuff that goes on, particularly at in-person conferences. I can get visual sensory overload and auditory sensory overload and information overload, and sometimes I just need to go away for a little bit. So providing for neurodivergent accessibility is just as important as providing ramps and closed captions and stuff. It's all about inclusion.
Yeah, Jade, your thoughts on this?
I liked Virginia's accidental misstep, but like when you said availability, I actually like that. If we can exchange accessibility with availability, maybe that might unlock some things in people's heads, because it's really the same thing. It's trying to get participation from everybody on as equal a playing field as we can reasonably do, being as every human is different. And um, like other people said, the value in that is, um, I don't think you can put a price on it. And particularly for writing events in that context, accessibility means bringing in more voices of more different able people physically, or mentally or emotionally, all of the different spectrum that humans truly exist on. And limiting that is not just sad, like it is sad, it's tragic, but I think it's also harmful in the sense that, like, in a book, that's one of the first places neurodivergent people often feel seen for the first time. That's when, like, everybody remembers that character they read or that story they read where it's like, whoa, that's me, right? Or that's a piece of me. That's a piece of me that I recognize that I didn't see in anyone around me. I just see in this book character. And making that available to more and more people is, I think, kind of at the heart of what we really want to be doing here. And so by limiting access to these places where we can get connections with other people, especially neurodivergent people, where we can talk about things, where we can have constructive discussion, where we can interact with different parts of our industry, is only going to improve our ability to bring that into all of our stories.
Absolutely. And, I think it is important to recognize that stories do have a lot of power beyond, you know, the story itself. We carry those stories and we carry things that we learn from those stories with us into our everyday life and into things that we do. And also, sometimes our stories inspire other people to write their own stories. And we need to make sure that we're also making space for those people to exist in the professional sphere. Um, what are some strategies that you've used to make your own events uh, accessible? Let's start with Kat this time.
Well, to be honest, I want events to be so accessible that I avoid holding them all together, which I know is not the greatest way to go about it. But it's so hard for me to feel the limitation of providing vast accessibility. Sadly, a lot of support needs cost. Like I have run an event where I do automatic live closed captioning and as someone who has auditory processing disorder, I rely on captions a lot. I get frustrated when captions aren't correct. But to hire people to do that work when you're a small grassroots organization, it costs. And I agree. It's, everyone who provides access deserves what they charge for it. I just wish there was more financial accessibility so that we can make events, that we can make events have as much accessibility as we can. So I've wanted to do a con for some time, and I'm not satisfied yet with how I can put one on because I would like to have more accessibility. I have to think about fundraising for that. With the Spoonie Authors Network, we had the Spoonie Authors podcast, so we provide transcripts for those as well. And yeah, I mean, that's that's the thing. I've done some online stuff, not a lot because it talk about empathy. I have hyper empathy, so it's very hard for me to not provide access for things. So I'm still on a journey to learn how to do that well. Um, at other events not run by me, I did push for quiet spaces, and you'd be surprised at the resistance I got for for just suggesting that. So yeah, eventually it was created, but it makes me think that um, yeah, maybe availability is a better word to use, making things available. Hmm. That's all I have to say about that. Sorry.
No, I appreciate the honesty, and I think that financial accessibility in general is something that's not talked about enough, not just in terms of like the tools that we have access to for hosting the events, but the events themselves. Um, that is why we host free events. Jade, would you like to speak next?
Sure. So for our events, I really feel what you said, Kat, about like wanting to make it perfect, right? And my autism is like it resists doing things imperfectly, but if we don't do things imperfectly, we can't ever have something to make better. It's kind of like writing the first page. So in the movement and chaos of imperfection, we've learned to add in things like live transcription and putting the transcripts on panels that get posted later on, like the YouTube channel. We've done things like um, figure out the ideal spacing for panels so we're not booking people back to back speaking right away, especially for people who kind of need that 5 minute space to just breathe and refocus. Um, we try not to have any like intense dress codes or like expectations around how people look on camera because we don't want people to feel nervous when they're presenting, and we don't want them to like turn off the video and kind of push away the engagement just because they feel uncomfortable. So we try to make the safe like as safe a space as possible, and that includes things like also when we look at or when we invite panelists or when we look through our list of panels that we want to do, we try to give the community a way to engage with that so they can, I think our member community can vote for panels, and we usually take the top 5 out of a list, and that makes sure that our content is still in tune with the what the community wants and what they need. And um, really trying to make an effort to make the representation as diverse as possible. I mean, we're limited to who applies, of course, but we do try to make sure we get diverse voices of all types so that we can get that the spectrum of voices involved. And yeah, I'm sure there are other things, but that's the
Yeah, that's great. Virginia, your thoughts on this?
I mean, I'd echo a lot of what Jade said. I also stumble and struggle with the feeling of overwhelm at the idea of making the event as accessible as I want it to be. Um, because we've bumped into the same thing. I would love to do actual live captioning with real transcribers, but it is so expensive, and we'd just have to fundraise massively for it. And then we fall into an even further, like, or it's my brain that falls into this trap. I cannot handle the idea of fundraising a large sum of money and then putting on anything less than a perfect show. So the fact that right now QuaranCon is this sort of like, we throw it together, we do the best that we can, we make it as accessible and professional as possible with a ragtag group of volunteers who are ride or die folks who are lovely and amazing, and we would not succeed without them. But it just, that's sort of the only way we can do it, at least in my head, because in my head, as soon as we start actually fundraising officially, we have a coffee account and people can donate to us, and that helps cover, like, recoup our costs for the website and everything. But if we go much farther than that, I start to feel like, oh no, now it has to be perfect, and now it has to be huge. Like, they really, like, in my head, it's either it's either our little ragtag band of volunteers, or it's like a massive nonprofit thing, and I can't wrap my head around it. So we work with the built-in AI transcription that's in YouTube and whatever, automatically. It's not perfect. It works fairly well, but not well enough, especially in for certain panels. With, if with because we have no control over every individual's audio, and so it makes it hard sometimes for the transcription to work. But that's just one hurdle. And then Jade, you mentioned too, like, you can only work with the body of applicants you have, as far as presenting a representative body of authors, right? And that is the thing we have struggled with most, and would like to work on more and more. It's the thing we work on every year, is to try to get more applicants from every body of authors, so that we then have as many representative groups throughout the whole con, right? um but yeah, that's the thing we're still working on, and we've come a long way from where we were in the very first year. And but we're still working on it. It's a thing that we want to do better. um and now I've lost the train of the original question, but it was
I think you got your
Mostly
point
covered
across.
it.
You did get a little bit off track there, but it was still
Yeah.
interesting. And yeah, I think one of the big things too is that it's not just about like making the space exist in a way that people can technically access it. It's about making it a comfortable space.
Yeah.
So like things like allowing panelists to wear masks since we all have them now anyway, or to like wear sunglasses if they feel self-conscious about not like being able to look at the camera. Um to encourage neurodivergent folks to apply to be panelists, and that is something that we're always working on, is ways to make our panelists feel more comfortable and to make more diverse people feel comfortable applying to be panelists. Yeah, like it's a an ongoing process, I think. And of course we all started our events during the pandemic, so our brains are kind of warped now anyway.
I
It's
think
been
the
a hard
important
year.
thing is to be open to adapting the process, right? If you're always open to adapting the process, then you can always improve.
Exactly. Speaking of the process, let's talk a little bit about other events that we've attended. How have you seen uh, accessibility approached at other events? Feel free to share both good and bad, whatever you think there's a lesson in. Um, Jade, I don't think we've started with you yet.
Oh, of course, you start with me. Um, so I've attended both physical and online events, and obviously, there's very different experiences both ways. And I think one of the biggest problems with online events, and I'm just going to talk about this one because it's just been like top of mind for me. It brings up so many hidden costs that like you can't even take into account when you're putting it on, because disability just has all of these hidden costs as a human to exist, so you automatically have less disposable income to spend on things. So if events can't be free, you may not be able to attend. So that makes us not want to raise prices, but also need to find ways to fundraise to do better accessibility. And then there's built-in things like people's internet access, their availability to get to like cameras or microphones, or just have reliable internet access affordably in where they live. So even when we try our best, there's so many things like that it just highlights about society that we should be broadening our scope so much more, because if you try to hit it within just the one arena, like we're talking about events, making events accessible, but it's so much more difficult when society doesn't want to do that with us.
Yeah, creating an accessible space within an inaccessible society is uh, a challenge. Kat?
Yeah, I will not info dump. I will not info dump. You just triggered off my whole
I'm
universal
so
design and
sorry.
social model of disability thing. I will reel it in, but so I'll just say yes. Yeah, no, it is true because we don't have a world built on universal design, and we're othered. We're othered as a result. And so accessibility has to be brought up and added on instead of something that's naturally part of us. But okay, stop. Um, one event where I find there's extraordinarily good accessibility is the Festival of Literary Diversity that takes place in Brampton, and now online as well. It's known as the Fold. Now, what's interesting about the Festival of Literary Diversity is that I don't know their history, but they've grown enough that they get a lot of sponsorship and they get a lot of grants. And it really does show you what happens when you can have financial accessibility to put on a con. Um, but the other thing I like about that particular organization is they have a person who is in charge of the accessibility. She's a rather well-known Canadian author, Amanda Leduc, and she's awesome. And she gives She gives, I was going to say sermons. She gives workshops about accessibility, and I've learned a lot from her. But I also heard that she works with a team. And I think that when you are a little larger, and even if you're a little smaller, it is nicer to have more than one person coordinating the accessibility, because it can feel overwhelming because accessibility is vast, right? The other thing I like about the fold is, as was said here, being open to realize, oh, we didn't realize that this is an accessibility thing. We're gonna work towards that. So trying to keep that open mind and such. So I really like them, but it does show how when you have financial backing, you can have a lot more supports. In contrast, and I will not name these cons, but I have witnessed some cons just content with ignoring, or at least in my impression, they seem content with ignoring, but they just don't seem to, it doesn't seem to fire up to think about accessibility at all, not even mobility accessibility. For they might have a stage with no way for the person who needs a mobility device to get on the stage. Um, I've had experiences with getting pushback for suggesting uh, inaccessibility or even ableism at a con, and that went over like super well. And what ended up happening for me was that I received the whole ally resume thing in my face. Well, we do this and we do that and we do that. It's like, okay, but I'm telling you, this actually really is a problem. Um, a lot of times disabled folks who do bring up things to organizations that are not led by disabled folks, they they can be known as, I call myself the crypt disturber, but I'm really not. I'm just really trying to bring up stuff. Um, so yeah, I've seen it done very well with people being open to change and open to suggestion, and then I've seen it done very poorly with sort what I feel is more the performative type of so-called allies, who cry ally tears when we have, you know, legitimate things to bring up. So that's not cool. Even if you are doing your best and you can't afford certain things, you can just say, I hear you completely. I understand you completely. These are the budgetary restrictions we have, and this is the accessibility we have now. But we're going to take what you say seriously, and we're going to figure out how to move on. Like, just acknowledge that the person spoke, that, and the
Yeah.
person brought things up.
Yeah, and trust me, the disabled person will understand when you cite budgetary concerns. um, we are all intimately familiar with those. Virginia, your thoughts?
I have attended a number of in-person cons as an exhibitor and panelist, and I've done a handful of virtual cons as well. Virtual cons overall have tended to have better accessibility, which kind of makes sense. For one thing, it removes a lot of physical barriers. For another, a lot of those virtual cons are free. And or they have a low enough price point. But the truth is, any price point does become a barrier to entry. But the other point is that a virtual convention in and of itself is sometimes a barrier to entry because it requires a certain amount of technology to attend. And even, if you we're suddenly dealing with people getting to library access to get on the internet long enough to enjoy any of the events or participate in them. But at any rate, so there I've seen varying degrees of all of it. One thing that I'll talk about a failure first that has, I think, swerved more towards a success, and I won't name the con exactly because I am starting off with failures. But there's one virtual convention that also started during the pandemic that started off with. I mean, really, it was hard to find a panel that wasn't all white guys who at least presented as neurotypical and yeah. It was a little bit, there There was not a lot of acknowledged diversity at all, and it didn't seem to be a striving point for that convention at all. Now, 3 years later, the most recent iteration of that same convention was amazing and far more representative of the actual body of SFF authors. And I was so delighted to see it. It was because it was a convention that I had sort of just watched happening and been like, "Oh, I wonder why it is that way," but I wasn't, close to anyone involved in organizing it, so I couldn't ask, and I wasn't going to, jump on anybody's throat about it because I know that there are challenges and whatever, and so, but it was really lovely to see that improvement, and it made me feel really good about kind of the world. I was like, "Yay, this one thing that I thought was only ever going to be um a bunch of very samey people, like this one group of people where they're going to be the only people represented in this entire convention for all time, and that's not true anymore. And now it was like actually a really solidly representative body, massive improvement. So that was nice. So that was both a failure that then has since improved, and that was really cool to see. And again, like I feel like we've improved too, QuaranCon and stuff like that. In-person events, whew, they seem to be very skewed by uh, who's local in a lot of ways for the smaller conventions, right? And even the bigger conventions, I feel there's I don't know. Yeah, I have yet to be impressed by an in-person events lineup, honestly. In terms of any form of diversity, whether it's having queer authors, neurodivergent authors, uh, or by POC, like just like nothing, like just like nope, sorry, there's really only mainly care about white dudes. That's like and then who also probably have other identities, right? Like I'm not just like not like white people can't be queer and neurodiverse, etc. But like just no attempt to even highlight those things or have yeah, more interesting discussions about them either. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
in person events tend to lack more. But I also, it depends on where you live. Um, some are better than others, but I've yet to see one that is like, oh no, they really made an effort, and that's awesome. It's more like, oh well, hmm.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, in person has its own other host of challenges, and
Absolutely.
most conferences can't afford to pay people to travel, which limits who they can have.
Yeah.
All right, so we are running low on our time, so I'm going to ask everyone to give slightly less rambly answers to our final question, which is how would you like to see accessibility approached at future writing events, and or how are you hoping to approach accessibility at your own events in the future? And we will start with Virginia this time.
Okay. Um, I would love for more events to be free or very low cost. Price point really is a barrier to a lot of people, and the way the socioeconomic dice fall, you're almost always going to be prohibiting entry to people who are already excluded for other reasons, right? So it is always harder on the pockets of people who are struggling, and those tend to already be people who are discriminated against in other ways. So you're just stacking blocks of discrimination there. So I do think I get it's not always possible for an event to be free. Totally understand that, but I do think that the more events that strive for that, the better. Which then comes down to funding, and then it comes down to how the event is run, where people can get funding. Is it held in a place where the government is actually even willing to support it with public funds? Would it have to be crowdfunded? And then do the people involved have the time and resources to do that? Keeping in mind that organizers can also be people from those communities that are discriminated against. So there's a lot of blocks there, and so I think it really comes down to just doing the best you can with what you've got. But I think as long as you're making an earnest attempt, and as Kate was saying earlier, or Kat, sorry, was saying earlier, the, responding to issues that are raised, right? If someone comes to you with their concern, recognize it, do the best you can with it. Try to try to fix it if you can. If there's any reasonable way for you to make the accommodation, freaking do it. And but if you can't, give an explanation, express the acknowledgement that you've heard the concern, that you would accept that it's a legitimate one, and that you will do what you can, but you can't do anything now, or what have you. Um, Even that, I think, would go a huge way to making people feel more welcome, even at the events where they're encountering barriers.
Absolutely. I'm going to cut you off there
Yeah.
in the interest of time and pass the question on to Kat about how you would like to see accessibility approached at future events.
I'm going to be dead honest with you. I would just like con organizers to realize in the first place that accessibility is important. I've come across where it, like I said, it doesn't even, no little light bulbs go above the head. And that's kind of gross. You know, I don't think we need to be that ignorant. Accessibility is not new. And it should be acknowledged, because let's face it, if you go and look at kind of reader demographics, there's a lot of readers out there who are blind, deaf, neurodivergent, disabled. You know, we consume a lot of speculative fiction as well. So I always am surprised, particularly in spec fic places, when I don't see accessibility. So one, just acknowledge that that's important. Um, and uh, if people don't even bother acknowledging that accessibility is important, or if they double down on their ableism, we're just not going to go, and we're going to tell all our disabled and ND friends about it as well.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
All right, Jade.
Um, I think there's something to be said about being careful what when we're throwing online events, especially about like platforms, and just trying to make it not difficult to navigate or access. And actually, I think a lot of online events have done this really well. Um, but it just remains to be said. And I think the other thing that we started doing in some of the weeknight writers events, I'm not sure if we were doing it in the early ones, but I've noticed it come up more and more. At almost every conference, we have at least one panel that's almost specifically focused around either incorporating disability or disability as a writer, or some kind of, like, we specifically have a panel that addresses that. And I kind of like that we invite that discussion. Like, it's great that it comes up naturally while we're talking about industry and stuff anyway, but it's nice to invite a place to just, this is where we're going to discuss this here, and that's what this is about, because it just opens up more space.
Absolutely. All right, we have 4 minutes left. So the final thing I'm going to do is ask all of you to share again who you are and where people can find you if they want to learn more about your work. And we'll start with Kat this time.
Yeah. So Kat, you can find all the catness at catgordon.com. And because my name is Irish and not English, it's CAITGORDON.com. I'll put it in the chat as well. And I am an autistic, disabled, and queer author of speculative fiction and disability themed anthologies.
Awesome. Jade?
I am an editor and writer. You can find most of my stuff at Eclipse Wordsmithing, WORDSYMITHING.com. Most of my stuff is on my website, and I also hang out at weeknight writers events quite frequently.
All right. And Virginia?
Virginia McLean, fantasy author. You can find me at Gwendamned on Twitter, at least for the next little while, until it completely burns. And also virginiamclean.ca or virginiamclean.com, VIRGINIAMCCLAIN, and .ca or .com. They both go to my website. And CornCon is the event that I run, and it is, you can find the channel on YouTube. It's completely free, and all of our panels and events stay up forever. So you can view them even when we're not actively running the con. And that's QUARONCON. and you might have to add 2020 or 2022 or something like that to it. But if you search for it, it'll show up. Or I think that's it. Oh yeah, and ADHD squad and BiPAN. So and that rep always winds up in my books, whether I mean it to or not.
That just happens sometimes.
Yeah.
All right. That's awesome. I was about to wrap up by saying, and I'm your host, but I'm actually not running this event. But I am your moderator. I am Dianna Gunn. I am a fantasy author. I write fantasy horror usually, and sometimes just fantasy, and very occasionally science fiction. And I do have a couple of books that I am planning to release this year, but I really want to direct you to the Weeknight Writers group. We will be hosting our first conference of the year in March, and the announcement for that will be coming out in the next couple of days at Ko-fi, ko-fi.com/weeknightwriters. So yeah, go check it out. And we also have a membership program over there where we have lots of cool stuff. Awesome. And we came just within time.
Yay.
Thanks everyone who joined us. I
Thank
really
you so
hope
much, Dianna.
you enjoyed our
Bye.
conversation.
It was awesome. Nice
As
to meet
rambly
you,
and
folks.
messy as we all are.